The ring wasn't chosen for her. The house wasn't chosen for her. Even the wedding date had been picked by two fathers over a dinner she hadn't been invited to attend. Lydia Marsh stood in the kitchen of a home she had lived in for 14 months, and still could not call hers. Pressing her thumb against the edge of a chipped saucer her mother-in-law had left behind, and thought about how many things in her life had been decided while she was in another room. The saucer was from a set that had belonged to Garrett Ashworth's first wife. Everyone in the county of Harlan, Kentucky knew this. Everyone pretended not to. Lydia had arrived at 23 into a house that still held the shape of another woman. A woman who had been loved, who had chosen this, who had picked out the curtains and planted the rose bushes along the south wall, and died 3 years ago, leaving behind a husband who needed someone practical, and a daughter who needed someone present, and a household that needed someone to run it. Lydia had been practical since she was 9 years old. It was not a quality anyone had ever thanked her for. She set down the saucer, dried her hands on her apron, and went to check on Bet. Bet Ashworth was 7 years old and possessed of a seriousness that made her seem older, a quality she had apparently inherited from her father along with his dark eyes and his habit of going very still when something was wrong. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a spelling primer open in front of her, and she was not reading it. She was looking at the window. "Bet?" Lydia said. Bet looked at her. "Is my father coming to supper?" "I don't know. He said he would." "I know he did." Bet turned back to the primer. She did not say anything else. She was 7 and she had already learned not to say certain things out loud. Lydia recognized the particular kind of early learning, the kind that happens in houses where disappointment arrives regularly enough that it stops surprising anyone. "Read me the next 5 words, Lydia said, pulling out the chair across from her, out loud. Bet read them. They were hard words for 7. She got 4 right. By the time Garrett Ashworth came through the back door at 8:30, Bet was asleep, and supper had been kept warm for 2 hours and then allowed to go cold in a way that was not entirely accidental. He was a large man, Garrett, with the broad shoulders of someone who had worked land before he could afford to hire others to work it for him, and he carried himself with the specific weight of a man who did not often have to explain himself. He was not unkind. Lydia had spent 14 months cataloging his qualities carefully, the way you catalog the features of a landscape you did not choose to live in but must navigate regardless. He was not unkind. He was not dishonest. He was not cruel. He was simply profoundly elsewhere. "Supper's on the stove," she said without looking up from the account book. He glanced at it. "You're doing the accounts again." "Someone has to." A pause. "I told you I'd get to those. You've said that for 3 months." She kept her voice even. She was good at keeping her voice even. It was another skill nobody thanked her for. "The feed bill is overdue. I've written out what needs to be paid in what order, and I've left it on top." He looked at the stove instead of at her. "You didn't have to do that, I know." He heated his own supper. He ate standing at the counter, which was what he did when he wanted to avoid the weight of sitting down across from someone. Lydia watched him from the corner of her eye and thought, not for the first time, about the exact shape of a marriage that was not unhappy, but was entirely hollow. She had known before she agreed to it. That was the thing she turned over most often in the small hours of the night. She had been 22, and her father had presented it to her across a breakfast table, with the careful tone of a man explaining something that was already decided. "Garrett Ashworth. Good man, good land. He needs a wife and you're sensible, and Bet needs a mother, and your sister's prospects are better if you don't take up the room." Her sister's prospect, Caroline, who was 20 and pretty in the way that made rooms rearrange themselves, who had never kept an account book in her life and never needed to, who had smiled at Lydia over her father's shoulder with an expression that was not quite apologetic and not quite grateful and not quite aware of what it was asking. Lydia had said yes. She had said yes because someone had to, and because nobody was going to ask her twice, and because at 22 she had understood, with the particular clarity of a woman who has been practical for a very long time, that the life she was being offered was not the life she would have chosen, but it was a life, and lives were what you made of what you were given. She had not counted on what it would feel like 14 months in. The specific loneliness of being in the same house as a man who looked through her when he looked at her at all. She did not tell anyone this. There was no one to tell. Garrett set his plate in the wash basin and said, "I'll be in Corbin tomorrow, business with Whitmore." Bet asked if you'd take her to see the Caverly horses on Saturday. He paused. Something moved across his face that Lydia had come to recognize, the momentary recollection of something he had not been thinking about, which was his daughter. "Tell her yes." You tell her. She's the one who asked. He looked at Lydia then. Really looked, with the direct attention he rarely gave her, and she held his gaze and let him read whatever was there without softening it. She had stopped softening things about 2 months ago, not dramatically, not as a declaration, simply as a matter of quiet exhaustion. All right, he said. I'll tell her in the morning. Good night then. She went upstairs. She lay in the dark and listened to the sounds of the house, and did not sleep for a long time. The thing that changed everything arrived on a Tuesday, in the form of a letter from her mother, and was not about Lydia at all. Her mother's letters were brief and practical, in the way of a woman who had been running a household on insufficient resources for 20 years, and had developed an economy of language to match. This one was 3 paragraphs. The first was about the garden. The second was about her father's health, which was declining in the way of a man who was not ill precisely, but was no longer young and had never been particularly careful. The third paragraph was about Caroline. Caroline, the letter said, had broken off her engagement to the Pendleton boy. Caroline had not broken it off quietly. There had been a scene at the Devers Spring social, the kind of scene that traveled. The Pendleton boy, whose first name was actually Edmund, and who was not a boy at all but a man of 31, with a prosperous dry goods business, and a mother who held opinions, was apparently not the only person whose name had come up in the dissolution. The name that had also come up was that of a young man called Reuben Foss. Reuben Foss had nothing to do with Caroline's engagement. He had spoken to her twice at church socials over the past spring, and he was 20 years old, and he was the youngest son of a tenant farmer on the Pendleton property, which made the accusation not merely wrong, but specifically damaging, in a way that was almost elegant in its efficiency. Lydia read the letter 3 times. Then she sat very still at the kitchen table and thought about Reuben Foss, whom she had met once at a church social when he was 17, and who had spent the entire conversation earnestly explaining the irrigation problems on his father's property. And she thought about Caroline, and she thought about the specific kind of fear that made a person reach for the nearest available thing to throw. And she thought about the fact that nobody in her family had asked her what to do. They had asked her father, who was unwell. They had asked the Pendleton boy's mother, apparently, which had gone poorly. They had asked their neighbor, Mrs. Warwick, who had suggested prayer and a period of social withdrawal, which was going to help approximately no one. They had not asked Lydia. Lydia was in Harlan County, and Lydia had made her match, and Lydia was settled. Lydia was the useful sister who was already placed and therefore could be set aside. She wrote back that same evening. She wrote to her mother and to Caroline separately. To her mother she wrote, I know what Caroline did and I know why she did it, and the why doesn't excuse it, but the how to fix it does not involve prayer or withdrawal. Tell me who has spoken to the Pendleton family and what was said. To Caroline she wrote, I know about Reuben Foss. I need you to tell me the truth about what happened, and I need you to tell it to me now, before more time passes and the story gets heavier. Write back today if you can. Caroline wrote back in 2 days. It took that long because Caroline had apparently spent the first day crying, and the second day deciding whether to be honest. The letter that arrived was 3 pages, and written in the small, careful script Caroline used when she was trying to control something. She had not meant for it to go so far, she wrote. Edmund had confronted her about something she could not put in a letter, and she had panicked. And Reuben Foss's name had been in the room because he had spoken to her that Sunday, and it was there to use, and she had used it, and by the time she understood how far the story had traveled, it was already the shape of the world. She did not say she was sorry in those words. She used a great many other words that arranged themselves around sorry without being it. Lydia recognized the structure. She had watched Caroline do this her entire life. What she wrote back was, Did you love Edmund Pendleton? Caroline's answer came the next day. No. Then that is not the part that matters right now, Lydia wrote. What matters is that a 20-year-old man who farms his father's land has been named in a story that is not his, and he will carry that name unless someone corrects it. I am asking whether you will correct it, or whether I will need to come home and do it for you. The silence that followed lasted 4 days. On the morning of the 5th day, Garrett came to breakfast and found Lydia at the table, with her traveling case already by the door. He looked at it, then at her. Where are you going? Home, she said. To my family. I'll be back by the end of the week. What's happened? She told him. Not all of it, but the shape of it. Caroline, the engagement, the young man whose name had been misused, the letter that had not come. She kept it brief because Garrett was not a man who wanted long explanations, and also because she did not entirely trust herself to give long ones without her voice doing something she would not be able to control. He was quiet for a moment. Your sister did this. Yes. And the boy, the Foss boy, he's been named publicly. In front of most of the county, apparently. Garrett picked up his coffee cup and looked at it rather than at her. He had the expression of a man running calculations. Your family wants you to go and apologize on Caroline's behalf. My family hasn't asked me to do anything, Lydia said. I decided to go myself. He looked at her then. What are you going to do when you get there? She picked up her traveling case. I'm going to correct a lie. The 2-day journey home by rail gave her time to think, which was not necessarily a gift. She thought about Reuben Foss and what 20 years old felt like, when the world had decided something false about you, and nobody pushed back. She thought about Caroline, and the specific architecture of a panic that reached for the nearest exit and didn't look at where it led. She thought about her mother's letter and the paragraph that had not been written, the one that would have said your sister needs you, that had not been written because Lydia had already been used once, and her family was not in the habit of asking twice. She did not think very much about Garrett. There was nothing new to think. Her mother was waiting at the station. Lydia Marsh was a small woman with her daughter's eyes and 30 years of careful management written into the lines around them, and she looked at Lydia stepping off the train with the expression of a woman who had simultaneously hoped for this and not asked for it. You didn't have to come, she said. Caroline didn't write to me, Lydia said. That was my answer. Her mother looked away. She's frightened. I know she is. So is Reuben Foss. They didn't speak again until the house. The house was the same as it had been, which was one of those facts that arrived with unexpected force after a 14-month absence. The same wallpaper in the front hall, the same loose step third from the bottom, the same particular quality of afternoon light through the parlor window that Lydia had spent 23 years reading by, and doing accounts by, and watching the street by. She stood in the hall with her traveling case and let the house settle around her, and thought about how strange it was to leave a place and have it stay. Caroline was in the parlor. She was sitting upright with her hands in her lap and the expression of someone who had been rehearsing something and had just run out of the rehearsal and arrived at the real moment. She was 20 and beautiful and frightened, and for 1 second Lydia felt only the full plain weight of loving her, which was uncomplicated and absolute. And then the second passed and she set down her case. Tell me what Edmund said to you, Lydia said. Before Reuben's name came up, tell me what happened, Caroline told her. It took a long time and it was not a comfortable story. Edmund Pendleton had found out something about the months before the engagement was formalized, something involving a letter Caroline should not have written to a man who should not have received it, and he had confronted her about it at the Devers social in front of people who could hear, and Caroline had panicked in the specific way that beautiful people panicked when their story started to come apart, which was to give the room a different story. Reuben Foss had been there that evening. He had been hired to help with the serving. He was 20 years old and he had spoken to Caroline exactly once that night, to ask if she wanted her glass refilled. That was the entirety of his connection to any of it. You used someone who refilled your glass, Lydia said. Caroline looked at the floor. I know. Do you know where he is now? I heard he stopped working for the Pendletons. Caroline's voice was very quiet. I heard he's been having trouble finding other work. That will continue until someone corrects the story publicly. Lydia stood up. I'm going to see Edmund Pendleton tomorrow morning. Lydia. Caroline's head came up. Edmund's mother is going to be there. She will say things. I expect she will. The whole town has already decided something about what happened. If you go to the Pendletons and tell a different story, they're going to ask why you waited. They're going to ask why it's you and not me. They're going to say, I know what they're going to say, Lydia said. I've been thinking about it for 5 days on 2 trains. A silence. Then Caroline said, very quietly, you always know what you're doing. No, Lydia said. I know what's right. Those are not the same thing. She went to bed that night in her old room with the ceiling she had looked at for 23 years, and she lay in the dark, and she let herself feel the full weight of what she was about to do, the way you press your tongue against a sore tooth, methodically, to know how bad it is. It was bad. She was going to walk into the Pendleton house and tell an uncomfortable truth about her sister, in front of people who had already arranged the facts into a shape that suited them. She was going to say that a young man everyone had decided to think poorly of had done nothing wrong, and then she was going to have to live with whatever came after that. in a county she no longer actually lived in, with a family that had not asked her to come, carrying the weight of a decision that was the right one, regardless of whether it helped her. She slept eventually. She did not sleep well. The Pendleton house was 3 miles out of town and ran to formality in a way that announced itself from the gatepost. Lydia arrived at 10 in the morning, which was the correct hour for a call of any substance, and she was received by Mrs. Pendleton before Edmund came downstairs, which told her that the household had been watching the lane. Mrs. Pendleton was a woman of 55, with the posture of someone who had long ago decided that her opinions were her most valuable feature, and had arranged her life accordingly. She looked at Lydia with the careful assessment of a woman cataloging a threat, and she offered tea, and she did not pour it. "Mrs. Ashworth," she said. "I wasn't expecting a visit." "I know," Lydia said. "I'm here to say something that should have been said before now, and I wanted to say it in person rather than by letter." "How very direct. I've found it saves time." Edmund came in 12 minutes later. He was 31 and not a bad-looking man, though he had the tight expression of someone who had been angry for 2 weeks and was disciplining the anger into a shape he could keep in a parlor. He looked at Lydia, and his jaw moved once, resettling. "Mrs. Ashworth, Mr. Pendleton." His stand, which she had decided was the right choice before she arrived. "I'm here about Reuben Foss." Something shifted behind Edmund's eyes. Not surprise, exactly. More like a man who had been expecting something to arrive and had not known what shape it would take. "What about him? He is not involved in anything that happened between you and my sister." Lydia kept her voice level. This was important, not emotional, not apologetic, simply factual. "He spoke to Caroline once that evening to ask if she wanted her glass refilled. That is the whole of his connection to any of it. She gave you his name because she was frightened, and his name was available. That was wrong. I'm here to tell you so, and to tell you that the story about him is false, so that whatever steps need to be taken to correct it publicly can be taken." Edmund looked at her for a long moment. "You're accusing your sister. I'm correcting a false account that is currently damaging an innocent person," Lydia said. "I understand those may feel the same to you. They are not the same thing." From across the room, Mrs. Pendleton said, "Your sister made a very serious accusation. One does not simply arrive and offer a different version and expect the matter to be resolved." "I'm not expecting anything to be resolved today," Lydia said. She turned toward Mrs. Pendleton with the steady attention she gave to difficult account columns, the kind that didn't flinch. "I'm providing information that is accurate. What you do with it is your own decision, but I want you to have it before more time passes and Reuben Foss has nothing left to lose." Silence in the room. Outside, through the parlor window, a horse moved somewhere in the yard. A door closed on the upper floor. Edmund set down his teacup. "What can you document?" Lydia had brought the documentation with her. She had spent the train ride home writing it out. The dates, what she knew of the evening's sequence, the name of Mrs. Warwick's daughter, who had been present and could confirm when Caroline had first mentioned Reuben's name, and in what context. 2 pages, neat as a ledger entry. She laid them on the table. He read them. It took him 4 minutes. Mrs. Pendleton read them over his shoulder without being invited to, which was its own kind of statement. When he looked up, his expression had changed, not softened, exactly. Something more complicated than that. The particular look of a man who has been angry in the wrong direction and is beginning to understand it. "If this is accurate," he said, "it is accurate. Then I owe someone an apology. You owe Reuben Foss a restoration of his reputation in the same county where it was taken from him," Lydia said. "An apology is a starting point." Edmund looked at her for a moment. "You came here by yourself?" "Yes. Your sister isn't." "My sister isn't here," Lydia said. "She will be part of whatever comes next. I'm here today because the longer this goes without correction, the heavier it gets and the less willing people become to revise what they've already decided. I'm here because I could not wait any longer for someone else to start." Mrs. Pendleton made a sound that was not quite a word. Then she said, in the clipped tone of a woman recalibrating, "You are not at all what I expected." "I rarely am," Lydia said. She left the Pendleton house at noon. She walked back to the road and stood in the summer heat with the documents in her bag and the weight of what she had done sitting in her chest, like something that hadn't decided yet whether it was relief or dread. Both, probably. She had found that the right thing and the comfortable thing occupied different countries, and she was standing at the border. Her mother was waiting on the porch when she got back. She had the expression of a woman who had been watching the lane for 2 hours and was not going to admit it. "How was it?" her mother said. "Necessary," Lydia said. Edmund Pendleton will need a day or two to decide what to do with what I told him. I think he'll do the right thing. His anger was real, but he's not a man who wants the wrong target. And his mother will do whatever is socially advantageous, Lydia said. Once it becomes clear that the true story serves the Pendletons better than the current one, she'll move accordingly. Her mother looked at her. When did you become so practical? Lydia said. I was going to say certain. I've had 14 months of practice, Lydia said, and went inside. She found Caroline in the kitchen. Her sister was at the table with her hands wrapped around a cup that had gone cold, and she looked up when Lydia came in with the expression of someone who had been carrying something too long and was not sure whether to put it down. You went, Caroline said. I said I would. What did he say? Lydia sat down across from her. He's going to need time, but I think he believes it. I think Edmund Pendleton is a man who is capable of being honest when he has the information. She paused. You need to go to Reuben Foss yourself. Before Edmund makes any public statement, before the story changes in anyone else's telling, you need to go to him directly and tell him the truth. Caroline stared at her. I can't do that. You can. He will. I don't know what he'll say. His family. His family has spent 2 weeks watching him lose work he needed, Lydia said. He's 20 years old. There is nothing you can say to him that is worse than what has already been done to him. Caroline's hands tightened around the cold cup. You want me to go alone? I'll go with you, Lydia said, but you have to do the speaking. The silence that followed lasted long enough for the kitchen clock to mark it twice. Then Caroline said, very quietly, I've been telling myself it would work itself out. I know, I've been telling myself someone would realize it wasn't true without me having to. I know that too. Caroline looked at her across the table. Her eyes were wet, but she was not crying, which was its own kind of effort. You've known what I was doing. Yes, for how long? Since your second letter, Lydia said. The one where you told me you were sure it would all settle down. Her sister was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I don't know how to do what you do. What do I do? You just. Caroline stopped, started again. You say the true thing, even when it's the worst available option. You just say it. It's not the worst option, Lydia said. It only feels that way in the moment before. After is different. She reached across the table and covered her sister's hands with her own. Come with me tomorrow morning. Caroline closed her eyes. All right, she said. All right. They went the next morning. The Foss property was 4 miles past the edge of town, and the two sisters rode together in near silence for most of it. Lydia had learned, over the years, that silence with Caroline meant something different than silence with other people. Caroline's silences were full, not empty. She was working through things in them. You could tell by the quality of her hands. Reuben Foss was in the field when they arrived. He was a lean young man with his father's coloring and a way of holding himself that had been altered in the past 2 weeks, subtly, the way a person's posture changes when they've been looking over their shoulder too long. He saw them coming and he went very still. Caroline stopped in front of him. She had practiced what she meant to say, Lydia suspected, and found that the practice had gone somewhere when the moment arrived. She stood in front of Reuben Foss with her carefully rehearsed words unavailable, and nothing between them but the open air of a Kentucky July and the weight of what she had done. Then she said, without rehearsal, I used your name when I was frightened and I had no right to. What you've lost because of that is my fault, and I'm sorry, and I intend to say so publicly. Reuben Foss looked at her for a long time. His jaw worked once. He had the particular stillness of someone who has rehearsed anger and arrived at the moment to use it and found that something else was in the way. Did Edmund Pendleton believe you? He said. He was looking at Lydia now. When you went there, I believe he did, Lydia said. He's going to say something, publicly. I expect he will. Reuben turned back to Caroline. He was 20 years old, and he had spent 2 weeks learning something about what people were willing to believe about a person and how quickly they were willing to believe it. He looked at Caroline with the gaze of someone who had paid for what she'd done and was deciding what to do with the debt. I accept it, he said. The apology. I don't know yet if I forgive it, but I accept it. That's fair, Caroline said, and her voice broke only slightly on the last word. They rode back to town in a different kind of silence. Not full this time, but lighter. Something had been set down, not everything, not even most of it, but enough to change the way the air felt. What Lydia hadn't accounted for was the man waiting at her mother's gate. He had come from Harlan County. He was Garrett's foreman, a gray-haired man named Sutter, who she knew by sight, and who held his hat in both hands in the way of someone delivering information they hadn't chosen to deliver. Bet, he said. Bet had fallen from the fence she had been climbing, despite being told for 6 months not to climb it. She was at the doctor's, nothing broken, but she had been asking for Lydia since she came to, and Garrett had sent Sutter because Garrett was at the doctor's and could not leave. Lydia stood at the gate with the afternoon heat on her shoulders, and felt the information settle and rearrange everything she thought the next 2 days looked like. "I have to go," she said to her mother, who had come out to the porch. "I know," her mother said. "Caroline will?" "I'll manage Caroline," her mother said. "Go to your child." She was on the first train the following morning. Sutter had given her what details he had: the fence at the east pasture, the fall, the doctor's name, nothing broken, but Bet had been frightened and had been asking for Lydia in the specific way of a child who had decided without knowing she'd decided it, who she trusted most. That was the part that stayed with Lydia through the long hours of the train ride. Not the fall, not the practicalities. The asking. A 7-year-old girl who had fallen and woken up calling a name, and the name she'd called was Lydia's. She had not let herself think too carefully about Bet in those terms. She had come to the Ashworth house as a practical arrangement. Someone needed to run the household. Someone needed to be present. She was practical and she was present. She had not let herself call it love, because love was not what had been arranged, and she was not in the habit of naming things that hadn't been offered. But a 7-year-old girl, frightened and hurting, had called her name. She got off the train in Harlan and hired a wagon and was at the house before noon. Bet was in bed with her left arm bandaged and a book open across her knees that she was not reading because she was watching the door. When Lydia came through it, the expression on the child's face was the most uncomplicated thing Lydia had seen in 14 months. "You came back," Bet said. "I told you I'd be back by the end of the week." Lydia sat on the edge of the bed. "I was a day early." Bet looked at her arm. "It doesn't hurt as much now." "Good. Father stayed all night at the doctor's." Lydia looked at her. "He did? He slept in the chair." Dr. Henshaw said he didn't have to, but he stayed anyway. Betta's voice was careful, the voice of a child reporting a fact that she found significant but wasn't sure how to categorize. "He held my hand until I went to sleep." Lydia said nothing. She straightened Betta's blanket and checked the bandage and told her it looked fine and asked whether she'd eaten, and Bet had not eaten since breakfast. So Lydia went downstairs and put together what she could find and brought it back up on a tray and sat with the child while she ate it. She was still sitting there when she heard the front door. Garrett came upstairs, with his coat still on, and stopped in the doorway. He looked at Bet first, then at Lydia, with an expression she had not seen on his face before. Not the through her gaze, not the looking elsewhere. Present, the way she had rarely seen him present. "You came back early," he said. "I got what I went to get done," Lydia said. "Your family is managing." She met his eyes. "Bet asked for me." Something crossed Garrett's face. "Brief and real and not managed." "She did," he said quietly. "She asked for you before she asked for me." Lydia didn't look away. "I know." He came into the room properly then, sat in the chair that was still beside the bed from the previous night, and talked to Bet about the fence and the doctor and the specific foolishness of climbing things that had been designated non-climbable. Bet argued with him in the patient, logical way she had, and Garrett argued back, and something that was very close to ordinary happened in that room, the kind of ordinary that required two people, and a child and an absence of performance. Lydia watched it. She did not know exactly what it meant. She knew it was different. Later, when Bet was asleep, Lydia went downstairs and sat at the kitchen table with the account book and the lamp and the quiet of the house around her. She heard Garrett come down. He poured himself coffee and did not drink it and stood at the counter in the way he stood when he was about to say something he hadn't said before. "What you went to do?" he said. "It went all right. Well enough. Edmund Pendleton will make a public correction." Caroline went to the young man herself. She looked down at the accounts. It cost her something. "I think she'll be better for it." "And you?" She looked up. He was watching her with the direct attention she had seen so rarely in 14 months that its presence was almost startling. "What about me? What did it cost you?" She considered the question the way she considered everything, without rushing. "My family's comfort with me, for a while. Caroline was angry for 2 days, before she agreed to go with me. My mother thinks I'm too direct." She paused. "It cost me a day with Bet." His expression shifted. "I didn't think about that. When I sent Sutter, I didn't think about what you were in the middle of. You were at the doctor with your daughter." "That was right. I should have thought about it, Garrett." She said it quietly, without edge. "I'm not keeping a ledger of what you owe me." "I know," he said. "That's the problem." She looked at him. He set down the coffee cup. He had the expression of a man who had been constructing something for a while in private and had decided it was close enough to finish to say out loud, "I have not been fair to you. I arranged a life that suited me and asked you to live in it, and I have not. I've been treating you like part of the household. I am part of the household." "You are not part of the household," he said, and his voice had gone somewhere she hadn't heard before, underneath the flat practical surface of it. "You came here and you learned this house and you held it together and you kept the accounts I let go and you sat with my daughter every time I wasn't there, and I have been looking through you for 14 months and I know it, and I don't know what to call that other than what it was, which was wrong." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the summer dark pressed against the window. "Garrett," Lydia said. "I'm not finished." She waited. "When Sutter rode back and told me you were coming, he said that you'd left your family and gotten on the first available train, because Bet was asking for you. I sat in that doctor's office, and I thought about what kind of person does that. What kind of person goes and does the hard thing for her sister, and then does it again for someone else's child, without being asked, without anyone thanking her for it." He stopped. "I've been thinking about it since, about what it must be like to be you in this house, and I am asking you now, which I should have been doing for a year, what you need. What you actually need. What would make this a life you chose instead of a life you were handed?" Lydia looked at this man, this large, elsewhere not unkind man, who had been absent in every way that mattered, and was now standing in his own kitchen asking her a real question and waiting for a real answer. She did not rush it. "I need you to talk to Bet," she said finally. "Not just correct her, not just tell her when you'll be home. Actually talk to her. She is very serious for 7, and she needs someone to take that seriously. All right, I need the accounts to be a shared problem, not my problem that you observe. If something is overdue, I need you to know it's overdue and have an opinion about it. All right. And I need." She stopped, tried again. "I need to not be furniture. I don't need declarations. I don't need anything dramatic. I just need to be someone you actually see when you look at me." Something moved through his face that she had only ever glimpsed briefly, and he had always managed back into place. He didn't manage it this time. "I see you," he said. "I have been seeing you for some time. I didn't know what to do with it." She held his gaze. "That's a start," she said. "That's more than we've had." He nodded. Once. Not the practical nod of a man agreeing to terms. The nod of a man who was beginning something. In the morning he came to breakfast and sat at the table. He poured coffee for himself and for Lydia without being asked, which he had not done before. He told Bet that she could come with him to look at the east fence in the afternoon and explain to him exactly which parts of it had seemed climbable and why. Bet considered this a great honor and ate her breakfast very quickly. Lydia watched from across the table and said nothing. She did not need to say anything. The letter from her mother arrived 10 days later. Edmund Pendleton had made a public statement at the Devers' next social gathering, confirming that Reuben Foss had no involvement in anything, that previous accounts had been mistaken, and that he was prepared to offer Reuben Foss a character reference for any position he sought. Mrs. Pendleton had been present, and had not contradicted it. Reuben Foss had been offered his position back, and had, according to Lydia's mother, accepted it with more grace than the situation required of him. Caroline had been there. She had stood at the edge of the room and let it happen without performing anything about it. Lydia's mother had written, "She looked like herself." "I don't know that I've seen that in some time." Lydia folded the letter and kept it. The second letter arrived 2 days after, from Caroline directly. It was one page and brief in a way that was new for her. "I told the man from the letters the truth about the engagement. All of it. I wrote to him before he could hear it from someone else. I don't know if he will write back. I decided I was tired of building things on incomplete ground. You were right about what it costs. You were right that after is different. I don't know how you know the things you know." Lydia set the letter on the desk and looked at it for a moment. Then she wrote back. "You learn them by living in houses where no one tells you what's true," she wrote, "and deciding that the not knowing is worse than the cost of finding out." She folded it and sealed it and handed it to the post herself. Garrett was at the account desk when she came through the front hall. He had taken to sitting there in the evenings, not always doing anything but present. She had stopped remarking on it. It was enough that it was happening. He looked up when she came in. He looked at her the way he'd been looking at her since the night in the kitchen, the new way, like the work was visible, like it had always been visible, and he had simply, finally, stopped looking past it. "Letter from home?" he said. "From Caroline. How is she?" "Better," Lydia said. "Getting honest with herself. It's costing her something." She sat down across from him. "She'll be all right." He nodded. He picked up his pen and went back to the column he'd been working through. Lydia opened the book she'd been reading, and the evening settled around them in the kitchen of a house that was still the same house it had been the night before. The same curtains, the same light, the same loose board in the hall. But the quality of the quiet had changed. She noticed it the way you notice a room after a window has been opened, not in any specific detail, but in the air of it. Something that had been closed was not closed. Bet came downstairs for a glass of water at 8:30. She stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at her father, at the desk, and Lydia, in the chair, and she said, with the complete matter-of-factness of a 7-year-old who had decided something was simply the way things were. "You're both here. We're both here," Garrett said. Bet considered this, found it satisfactory, and went back upstairs. Lydia kept her eyes on her book for a moment. Then she looked up and found Garrett looking at her with an expression that was quiet and unhurried and more honest than any conversation they'd had in 14 months. "She's going to be all right," he said. "Not about Caroline." "I know," Lydia said. The summer pressed against the windows, indifferent as summers always were, the way of weather that does not arrange itself around human decision. But inside the kitchen of the Ashworth house, two people sat in the same light and occupied the same quiet, and neither of them was elsewhere, and that was new, and it was enough, and it was the beginning of something that had not been offered 14 months ago in a conversation Lydia hadn't been invited to, something she had not been given but had, through the long patient work of refusing to disappear, built herself. She had arrived in a borrowed life. She had made it, piece by deliberate piece, her own.